Hey, Ken Pecoraro here with another edition of CPC Speaks podcast. Got a great guest, someone I know well, and she'll tell you about our relationship, how it's evolved. It started one way and it's in a totally different situation now. So her name is Nicole Tierney. She's got a great story. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nicole Tierney. Thank you so much for joining the podcast. It was very important for me to do this. As a recovering person with substance use disorder, I'm trying to help others that are in a similar situation, reduce stigma, and hopefully give some hope, because this is a disease that we can overcome. It takes a lot of work and a lot of support. And I was very fortunate that I became affiliated with CPC, and they have a plethora of support systems, groups, options, because as most of you probably know, alcohol and drugs was not our problem. We had underlying issues. And once we were able to address them, we were able to move from abstinence to sobriety to recovery to living a full life. And so that's what I'm here to hopefully share my story and tell you about.
Great. So why don't you start a little bit about the background?
So it's weird. Ken, just to disclose from the forefront, was my first counselor when I started to get sober and came to CPC. And when I finally started getting sober, I always used to think I had this repressed trauma because I could never describe, based on my life, how I wound up where I did. I had a loving family, a very good childhood. I was very fortunate. I was very blessed. I was academically successful. I was athletically successful. Married parents, middle to upper middle class, good siblings, no trauma. And those were the reasons I always thought people became alcoholics and drug addicts. I had a predisposed notion in my head, which I think also helps contribute to the denial. And when I look back, I can clearly see why I wound up where I did. And Ken, as you know the story, I was always very afraid to die when I was a child. I don't know exactly why. I was never a sickly child, but I was afraid to die. And when I was 14, I got very sick. I ruptured a hole in my stomach and needed life-saving surgery. And right before I was getting the surgery, I was on the table, a very cold, hard steel table, getting iodine rubbed on me. And there was a light, and it was the warmest I ever felt, and I was not afraid to die. But it wasn't Jesus or God or anything like that. Looking back, it was the morphine coursing through my veins. And for one point in my life, I wasn't afraid. And I think that, although I obviously take personal accountability, I'm not shirking my responsibility, I think that initial exposure to such potent substances as a child, when my brain was still in the development mode, my prefrontal cortex hadn't been developed, I was 14 years old, set off a path of, all of the reasons that lead to addiction, which may not necessarily be trauma, bad parenting, bad morality, weakness of character. It's genetic, it's epigenetic, it's environmental, and it's access. So I think that, looking back at my story, I've learned a lot that when I first came into recovery, I couldn't grasp.
So tell a little bit about where it went next.
So unfortunately, again, because I was very blessed and because I had a different theory, I did not know any women alcoholics, and I certainly didn't know any women drug addicts. So I proceeded through high school. I was a all-state soccer player, made the National Honor Society, graduated 9th in the class, full scholarship to college. At college, I was an academic All-American, played 2 sports. I thought I was in this healthy, vibrant relationship, married my high school sweetheart, and then I got a postgraduate scholarship to law school. And all the while, I'm drinking all the time, and at every possible turn, I either have a legitimate health reason or probably a manufactured one to get more narcotic pain medicine. For example, I was attacked by a dog. I had 7 facial plastic surgeries. I had to have knee surgery. And it just seems, looking back, I was always on some sort of substance. And that took away what probably now was undiagnosed mental illness, maybe an attachment disorder or just nervousness and anxiety with this being obsessed with dying or afraid to die and yet partaking in the most risky behavior there is. Then I went on to have children. I was an attorney, practicing attorney, and by society standards had everything a successful, well-developed, quote-unquote, healthy person has. But I was a drug addict. At that point, I was stealing prescriptions from doctors. I had basically unlimited access to medicine because I had prescription pads and an unlimited amount of money. And I took drugs every day for the better part of probably the last 3 or 4 years of my addiction. And people often ask, what made you stop? And I wish I could explain, but I really can't. There was no.
Yeah, it's not always like a magic moment. And sometimes, but sometimes it's just the right time.
Right.
So now that we're at that point, yeah, it's this is like an abridged version. If we had more time, the story is very, very interesting. That kind of the roller coaster that you rode is very, very, to be in such a successful position of a lawyer and then to where it ended up going. So what's the next part? Tell us about where to bring you.
I always joke. I say, people would tell me, people liked me. I was a very likable person. People would say, do you think it's a problem? And I would say, do I think it's a problem? Do I think my drinking or drugging is a problem? I'm an attorney. I get paid $400 an hour to tell people what their problems are. So how can I have a problem? And it was just the ego and the access. And then again, because of the physiological effects of drugs, you're not able to rationally understand that the consequences are linked to the behavior. So I thought I was being treated unfairly. I thought I was a victim. And then on the other side, on the scientific side, I now needed the material, the dopamine, the serotonin that the drugs were providing, that I could no longer produce naturally. So my body would crave, and I would take incredible risks to get drugs. At some point, DIFA stepped in. Custody was taken of my children. My law license was taken. My driver's license was taken. My marriage license was lost. My family was beside themselves. They could not cure this with love. They could not cure it with anything. I had gone to some very expensive rehabs. We paid cash at a couple. I had private insurance. And I got in a very dangerous world where it wasn't about recovery, it was about money. And then I wound up basically homeless. I was facing 7 years in jail, and I was ordered to go to treatment. I had no insurance. I had no ability to pay. I had nothing. And I had been to jail for 21 days, had multiple seizures in jail, had been assaulted in jail, and I was afraid to go back. And so my brain had dried out a little bit, and I was able to understand the depth of what I was facing. And I went into a psychiatric ward treatment, Bergen Pines, and they referred me to CPC. And that's where my journey, I would characterize it as a journey first of reservations. I was not going to get sober. I was going to come to CPC and figure out a way to drink, because I heard that people that drink and drug do so because they're not spiritually healthy. So I figured I'd figure out how to get spiritually healthy and go back to drinking and drugging. So CPC was just going to be window dressing to do that. And then I came to CPC and I decided I needed to be abstinent because I was too afraid of consequences if I got caught again. And I figured once I got off probation and got out of treatment, then I would go back to drinking. And then, as Ken, as you know, I slowly began to get sober. And by sober, I mean living as a dignified, honorable, impressionable person that people can look up to, joining the human race again. Because for so long as an addict, I had basically lived like an animal. And through the various services at CPC, I learned to.
When you say that, I mean, that's a harsh sounding term, living like an animal. Like, what was that? I mean, like,
I say it because it truly was. Every day I woke up thinking, I don't want to live this way anymore. And every day I was driven by an obsession and a compulsion to get drugs so I wouldn't go into withdrawal and I wouldn't feel anything. In the beginning, I think I took drugs to escape the fear and the pain and the worry about dying. But slowly, because of the damage it does to your brain, it affects all your receptors. And you can't feel joy, you can't feel love, you can't feel connection. At some point, when I was sleeping in abandoned buildings and I lost custody of the children, I would say there was a period of at least 3 or 4 months where I hadn't touched a human being and hardly spoken to anyone. Wow. My whole day existed to get drugs. The whole night existed to get drugs the next day. And that's why, again, for me, it was animalistic in that there was no intention. There was no purpose. It was just existing.
Okay, so yeah, and I always say to anybody that when people know you, it's hard that people know both sides. It's hard to imagine that you were like that because you're so different now. That's so, unless you tell that story, people would never see it by seeing you or by speaking to you. So a little bit, continue with your story of recovery now.
Right.
It's a great story.
So then I'm sentenced. I'm facing 7 years in jail, or I can go to drug court. And everyone tells you drug court is a program that's gonna make you fail, and you're not gonna do any good, and this and that. And again, I wanted to be sober, but I did not know how to be sober. And more importantly, my major downfall was I didn't know how to ask for help. I was always an attorney. I was the breadwinner of the family. I was a star. I didn't know how to say, I don't know how to do this. Hard work had always gotten me where I want, but you can't work your way out of addiction. You can't think your way out. You can't buy your way out. It's a very different process than anything I'd faced. So I decided I would go to drug court, but rather than get ordered to treatment, I would do it on my own because I did not like being told what to do. So I came to CPC earlier and joined the intensive outpatient program.
Right.
And that was an amazing program because it was 3 hours a day, 3 times a week, and it was psychoeducation. And by that, I mean, I learned what addiction was. I never knew that I was an addict because of epigenetic and genetic and biological factors. I never realized that I was an addict for any other reason than I was a terrible human being who deserved the fate and brought it on myself. And because I was abstinent and not using drugs, because we drug tested here often, we had accountability. You had counselors who cared, who said, how's your week going? We did check-ins. We met people. The group counseling was a wonderful, for me anyway, it was a wonderful experience because I was able to connect with humans again. And I was able to connect first with people who were more like me. So I didn't have to be as nervous. So the group setting of the therapy in the intensive outpatient was wonderful. And I believe that program lasted for 3 months. And take this for irony. When I quote unquote graduated, I asked them if I could keep on coming.
Yeah, I remember that.
I was so afraid to change anything. And I had agreed that when I reached 90 days sober, or around 90 days, I heard the probation officer goes away, and I had this plan that I was going to drink. And the probation officer would be away and I'd be able to drink. And I woke up and I looked at the clock and it was a little bit after 11 and I hadn't drank. And it occurred to me, I can do this. And I looked back and that was probably the beginning of, again, not to be rude, the animalistic / abstinence, where I slowly entered what being sober was about. And then Ken, I believe that's when IOP, when you get towards the end, you get an individual counselor. And I had one individual counselor, and then I wound up with you at some point. Right. And that's when it started occurring to me through talking to you and working through some of the technique that you used. Alcohol and drugs were not my problem. I had issues that I needed to address. I had coping issues. And the one thing that I remember, the day you told me it, I was heartbroken, but you asked me if I'd ever seen a psychiatrist. And I remember thinking, he thinks I'm crazy. I thought he liked me. I thought I was doing good. I stopped using drugs. I've done everything everybody's asked. And now he's calling me sick. And I had a very negative connotation. No, not of course not. No, of course not. But I had such a negative connotation to mental illness. Right. I thought that you were saying that. But in fact, it was the opposite. In fact, you were seeing how hard I was working and how much I was encountering barriers that a lot of people don't encounter. I have a mental illness, and that's okay. I also have Barrett's esophagus. I have acid reflux. I have certain diseases. And when I went to see the psychiatrist, even though in the beginning it was a painful experience, I do believe it is the reason that I have been able to maintain long-term sobriety. And having gone through very, the finest of rehabs and this and that, here at CPC, everything was in one building. So Ken walked down to the psychiatrist, made the appointment. I had accountability. Everything was set up. I explained to you how nervous I was, and you ushered me there. And then I got in the hands of a very capable psychiatrist who put me on non-narcotic medication. I left some of those rehabs with benzodiazepams. I mean, it's insane. You can't be a pill addict and leave on another drug, on another addictive drug. So when I was here, it was so important that it was all under one roof, that the psychiatrist understood that I could be drug seeking, that I had a history. And so they were able to tailor the treatment for my mental illness so that it was consistent with recovery. And then at that point, Ken and we broached, me trying to reestablish visitation with my children. And then again, Ken pointed out that I had never been a mother sober, and he got me in touch with parenting coaches. You got me in touch with the Youth Network Success so that I could learn how to be a parent, because here were, not only was I being a parent, but my children also had substantial damage as well. And I had a no contact order for 9 months. So that's where I look at the transition from, I was, first abstinent, then I started being a little bit sober, working on myself. And now I stepped into like a second level sobriety of, can I be of use to others?
Right. You're dealing with the whole picture, not just, some places it's just drug, and you were looking at the whole thing, mental health, and just all the holistic factors and the social determinants of health, as they say, family, and you did so much work across that whole spectrum. So to close it out, how did it all come together? So what's recovery like today? Because it's really, they say the word miracle. You don't want to throw that word around, but it really is miraculous.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and exactly. I mean, I look back. I've was with you for 9 years, and in those 9 years, I went to domestic violence groups, relapse prevention groups, did a lot of counseling with the children. Did family counseling. Ken knows all my family members. They came in. He made referrals when necessary. I got career services. I got letters of support to be released from drug court. And now, I got everything. And I shouldn't say I got things back. Life got me back. My children got their mother back. My parents got their daughter back. My brother got his sister back. And now I'm recovered. I live, I thrive, and I, very much inspired by Ken and people like him, decided to go back to Monmouth University to get my master's in clinical mental health counseling. And I'm, pursuing to become a licensed professional counselor and a licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor, because I see what a difference treatment can make for people. Whole treatment, not one part, not one thing. There are many components, just like there's many components of addiction, there are many components of recovery. And what started out with, first walking into an AA meeting, to then going to IOP, to then staying at IOP, to addressing my interpersonal relationships, to addressing my psychiatric, even with my Barrett's esophagus. My psychiatrist was in touch with my general practitioner. So, the collaborative approach that we take here, that you take here at CPC, and that was taken with me, I think led to, a finished product.
And also, just you brought family into it. It's just, you can talk about how the family recovered. Look at how the kids are doing today. You got 3 in college now, right?
Yep. So when I came to Ken, that would have been 2008. I came. Okay. My triplets, I have triplets. They were 8 years old, and I had a son, Cole, who was 5. Cole had, some issues, and again, through family counseling and mobile response, Cole is now at vocational tech. He has received student of the quarter 3 out of 4 quarters. He gets.
It was unthinkable at one point, right? Really,
the police have not been at my house for Cole in years, but he has come so far. The triplets are absolutely amazing. They are all in college. My one daughter is studying psychology and social work, again, because she has seen the difference that it has made in my life with hers. And I've just had some moments with them that they've said, thank you, Mom, thank you, God. And they've come to CPC, so we all get it. And probably the one thing that I would share on a personal level is during my sobriety, I tragically lost my father. He bled to death, and it was a horrible, horrible day. And I didn't relapse. And most important, I didn't even think of relapsing. I didn't even think of getting high. And that's the power. And my mom died shortly after he did of a broken heart at 68. and she was on hospice care, and I had access to medicine right in front of me, and I didn't get high. And so for people, no matter how low you are, no matter how much damage has been done, and no matter how hard your life is, with the correct treatment and care and supportive services, which is out there, we can and do and will recover. And it used to bother me. People used to say, once you get sober, your life will be better than your best dreams, and tenfold. I could never have imagined being so full and so happy. And even though I have had tragedy, I've had loss, and life is not perfect, I'm very content. And that's something, when I walked in this building, gosh, I first came here in 2006, I could never have imagined. So I'm so thankful to people here at CPC, the CPC program, the referrals, the knowledge, and most of all, just the dignity and respect I've always been treated with here.
Well, you've done such a great job, and even just to throw in the fact, Tommy, you did it as a single parent, which is like, it's just great for anybody else who might be hearing this that's struggling, saying like, how am I going to do this? Like the fact that the kids are doing great, it's really it's awesome. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. And all right,
thank you so much. Thank you all, and keep the faith.